Well, I heard the news. There's good rockin' tonight. So, this was very popular. The first video that I need to turn on this microphone down here. I can hear it on the side here. Very popular. The first reading around. So, I wanted to get a second episode for y'all. Know that I'm going to finish From Here to the Great Unknown. Also, Child Bride. The June Waneko book as well. We are going to get those finished. And then we're going to continue reading Elvis and Gladys as well. And of course, The Faith of Elvis. We got plenty of stuff planned, obviously. But let's read some more of Joe Esposito's book. Now, a lot of y'all are not big fans of Joe. I have to say that in the characters of Elvis Presley, I think he was more of a friend to Parker than Elvis, but what do I know? Elvis did choose to bring him along. Heck, wasn't Joe Esposito on that last vacation in Hawaii? So that's something I always think about. Okay, sometimes we believe something and maybe it's not true. Thank you to those that have been watching lately. Thank you to the super thanks. Greatly appreciate that. I know some of y'all hopped in and did watch my live. I sang a couple of my originals that are non-Elvis tribute songs, and then over on Elvis and the Legends, I popped on and tried to do some Elvis songs, tribute songs, and they did hit me with a copyright claim. But I may schedule something so y'all know here in Rare Elvis Photos to go over to Elvis and the Legends and just do a show. And not worry about it too much there. I think I can get away with it over there. I can't get away with it here. This is my main channel, and of course, I don't want them shutting this one down, right? All right. So, where do we stopped at page 23. And Joe Esposito talked about how all the girls were waiting for Elvis to show up, and they were screaming at every soldier that came out of the buses, like they were Elvis, but you couldn't tell really. So it says, I saw Elvis around the base over the next few months. Some people think he didn't live in the barracks because he got special privileges, but anyone could live off base if they had family. Soldiers with dependents were given a house and allowance, and most recruits brought their wives. But Elvis's entourage included his grandmother, Minnie Mae, his father, Vernon, his friends from Memphis to keep him company, which were Lamar Fike and Red West. Cliff Cleaves came over after Red went back to Memphis. Now, they weren't on payroll, but Vernon gave them a very small allowance. And that's interesting. That's a little tidbit of information that perhaps we weren't aware of. Now, I think Red went back over to Germany, but Red left. Did he leave because him and Elvis got in a fight? Did he leave because he wasn't jiving with everybody? The last chapter talked about how when Joe met Red, when Joe met Red was pacing back and forth and didn't talk much, didn't interact with the group much. I wonder, Red was a bit of a hothead, obviously, right? From what I've heard. Maybe they got in an argument. Elvis reported to our base in Friedberg every morning. When he arrived, the rest of us were always standing at attention outside the barracks, which we're told had housed Hitler's SS troops during World War II. Did y'all ever think about that? Elvis is over there stationed in Germany, where just 16 years before World War II was going on. I wonder if Elvis ever talked about that. All right, let's continue. As we stood there, panting from our mad dash for roll call, Elvis would cruise by in a Mercedes or the sporty white BMW that he'd bought directly from the company. He was always late, and he always tossed a sharp military salute to the officers as he flashed them the famous Elvis grin. Now, I don't know if I like that. From everything I've ever heard about from other soldiers, Elvis was not always late. Whoops. Elvis was not always late. He took his duties seriously. Um, have y'all heard about Elvis getting special treatment or being late? You're not allowed to be late in the military. Have y'all heard about that? I haven't heard about that. In any of the books that I've ever read, he was a model soldier. So once again, a lot of people call Joe Esposito Lion Joe, right? Um, could it be? Could it be made up? I don't know. Elvis was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division in Friedberg as a jeep driver. Now his duties were basically reconnaissance and included driving to the front lines and scouting that situation. Now the Cold War was raging at the time and no one knew when things might heat up and we all had live ammo nearby. After everyone has been in the Army for a set number of months, he's automatically promoted from private to private first class. After that, promotions become a matter of merit rather than seniority. As an office worker, I become a Spec 4 after the usual interval, and so did Elvis. And Elvis did that in June of 1959. Now, I topped out at Spec 4, but Elvis went on to become a sergeant, a rank that very few two-year draftees ever reach. He got his triple stripes on January 20th, 1960. Now, there could have been a little favoritism at play, but Elvis was a good soldier. He worked hard, even at such menial jobs as sandpapering the exhaust pipe of his Jeep and KP. Most important, except for the late arrivals at roll call, he didn't goof off or screw up. He wanted the respect of officers, and they gave it to him. Not because he wanted it, but because he earned it. I don't know about this late stuff. That's bothering me a little bit. It's almost like, if it's not true, it's almost like Joe's trying to say something that nobody else has ever said. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Okay, let's continue. It was rumored that a deal had been struck between Elvis and the Army. Elvis wouldn't be a pain in the butt, and the Army wouldn't be a pain in the butt. Elvis wanted to play it straight as best as he could, and the Army wanted to make sure that there was no unfavorable publicity. As I understood from my friends in the Public Information Office, the PIO, a brigadier general at the Pentagon was assigned to Elvis. This general was not always on post, but he was always nearby, attuned to any matter involving Elvis Presley. If a sergeant decided to get cute and give Elvis a bad time, he was told to lay off immediately. There'd be no harassment, and the reward for the Army was that Elvis played ball. The highlight of the first evening was Elvis's animated stories about show business. The group of awestruck recruits hung out and hung on his every word. And the life Elvis was describing was light years away from the Army routine or our own humdrum realities back home. One story he told that night I would hear many times again through the years. The Hollywood people hated Colonel Parker, Elvis said, laughing gleefully. They'd rather see the devil himself than the colonel arriving for negotiations. When the colonel was making the deal for Love Me Tender, Elvis's first movie, the producers wanted to pay him as a contract star, according to the custom of the time. They offered $700 a week, not a bad salary for 1956, plus the car of his choice, and they implied that they'd supply him with all the women he could handle. Now Elvis thought that was fantastic and wanted to go for it. What more could any young, red-blooded, all-American male ask for? But the colonel said no. He wanted a piece of the business. Elvis had to have a percentage of the gross profits. That kind of deal was unheard of in Hollywood at the time, particularly for a movie that was unknown. Elvis loved to reenact the scene that followed between the colonel and producer Hal Wallace. I will do my best to reenact that for y'all if I can. Now, too bad I know I got hair under here. It's too bad I don't have a bald head. I have a little bald head thing, then I could be Colonel Parker. Be all blustery. Life is simple, the colonel said. My guess is the only reason you want Elvis in the movie is that he'll attract a crowd that will buy tickets. Is that why you want him? Yes, Wallace conceded grudgingly. Well, I can't talk Danishly or whatever he was. The colonel continued. If Elvis is bringing people to the box office, shouldn't he have a part of the business, huh? No, you just can't do it that way, Wallace protested. That's not the way it's done. The colonel was immovable, and he stared at him with his little beady eyes. Something like that. Then I guess you don't need us because you can do it another way, he said. He signaled Elvis, and the two of them left Hal Wallace's office. Several hours later, they received a call asking for them to return. My goodness. It's crazy. It's unheard of, Wallace groused, but you've got a piece of the action. I'm sure Elvis was like, oh, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Or maybe Parker said, don't say anything. Just walk out. Elvis made more money on his first movie than all the contract players at the studio put together and most of the stars. That first movie contract was a big, big, big deal to Elvis. In later years, he would own a full 50% of the net on his movies, which the Presley estate retains to this day. However, that wasn't the case with the early ones. He told us that night about how he got together with the Colonel. So, we know Joe Esposito is a fan of Parker, right? You know, and I think that y'all know that I understand the business side of it. I've told y'all that Parker was great for Elvis business-wise, to get him rich, to get him successful, to get him as famous and well-known as he was. And I think that Elvis held on to Parker way too long out of loyalty, out of appreciation for the fact that Elvis made him the biggest star, got him the most money, things like that. Really, really, once that first deal happened, everything else had to be that good or better. Parker knew Elvis was going to sell. But he had to get the money people to say yes. So you can see that Joe Esposito, he's kind of making Parker favorable in this book so far. So, Joe said, however, that wasn't the case with the early ones. He also told us that night about how he got together with the Colonel. In 1955, Bob Neal, who was acting as Elvis's manager, was shopping for a better contract than Elvis had with Sam Phillips of Sun Records. Now, Neal knew the Colonel from way back, so he called on him for advice. Is there any way you can help us get a better deal for Elvis, he asked. He got a bad deal with Sam Phillips, only 2.5% of the royalties. Let me try RCA, the Colonel offered, but I've got to have some idea of the price Phillips wants for Elvis. Phillips wanted $35,000 for the master tapes and all rights. The Colonel called his friend Steve Scholes, a vice president in RCA's record division. Now, for y'all that maybe don't know this, Parker had already made a lot of money. He was already very, very connected. You know, working with Eddie Arnold, working with Hank Snow. He had connections. Elvis made Parker. He made Parker eventually. But at that point in time, Parker could have made really, really good money with a lot of people, including the guys he was working with. But Elvis Presley was a one-of-a-kind, once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-millennium person. And Parker definitely recognized that. So you got to give him credit for that part, right? We're talking 1953, 1954, 1955, those years. Definitely cool, definitely different. But psychically, I mean, the labels weren't flying out to see Elvis, driving out to see Elvis. You know what I'm saying? So we have to understand and appreciate that part of Colonel Parker, even while we condemn how it ended up and how it ended and how Parker handled him. You know, later on. All right, $5,000 is the best we can pay, Scholes said. The Colonel called Bill Bullock, another RCA vice president. Colonel, I think it's going to be great, Bullock said, but we've never put up more than 15,000. That's all we'll go. Well, the colonel negotiated them up from $25,000 to $25,000. Then told RCA that if Phillips didn't receive a $5,000 deposit in cash or cashier's check by Friday, he couldn't hold off making another deal. RCA didn't take the bait. The colonel withdrew his own funds from his bank and sent Phillips a $5,000 deposit. The next day, Saturday, he called the two RCA vice presidents at home. This is your last chance, he warned. This time they went for it. Now, if that is true, and once again, have y'all heard that? I haven't heard that. I don't doubt the veracity of that story, that it could very, very possibly be true. But it also showed Parker's confidence in Elvis. It also showed Parker's investment. $5,000 in 1955? I think that's the year it was. That's a lot of money. What, 100 grand these days, maybe? All right. Let me know if you've ever heard that before. We'll be there Tuesday to make the deal. Now, Phillips got his $35,000 and the colonel was reimbursed. But the agreement stipulated that the money RCA paid to Phillips was only in advance on Elvis's future royalties. Elvis would have to pay RCA back, except for $5,000 they gave him for a car, the pink Cadillac that he presented to his mother, who couldn't drive. Now, a few weeks after the agreement was made, the colonel read an article in Variety stating that RCA had paid Elvis $35,000 plus $5,000 for a car. No mention was made of the fact that Elvis had to earn back that amount before he saw any income from the records he made. Now, the colonel got on the phone to George Merrick, the president of RCA Corporation, who was in Hawaii. Variety called me, asking for my story about what your RCA people told him, he said to Merrick. I'm going to have to tell him that Elvis has to pay the money back. I'll call you in about an hour, Merrick promised. Well, less than 60 minutes later, the phone rang. Tell Elvis it's a bonus, Merrick said. So, once again, considering that the source is Joe Esposito, do we have any paperwork about this? Has anybody ever seen any of the paperwork about whether it's a bonus or whether Elvis had to pay it back? Gosh, don't you wish you could just have a full audit of all the financial doings of Elvis Presley? It would answer a lot of questions, including hotels and stuff like that. Yeah, I know Graceland has all the receipts and all the checks and stuff. But are they going to show them to you or show them to me? No, said Priscilla back in the day. No, says the people nowadays, because they don't want to share, they don't want to split anything, they don't want to, that knowledge is power, right? But wouldn't it be great? So we just have to assume, we have to guess, we have to wonder. But if that's true, that's the colonel taking care of Elvis. You didn't really hear many negative stories about Elvis and the colonel, or Elvis, how he felt about the colonel, until late in the 60s. The whole Mary and Priscilla thing, burning Larry Geller's books. And by the way, Larry Geller did email me back. We probably are going to have a conversation at some point. Just want to let y'all know that, because you guys have asked me about that. Said, hey, message Larry. I'd love to have Larry on here, and I hope that we can make it work. Also, y'all know I talked to Bridget Cruz. I haven't put her on the show. I haven't shared any of the stories, the lawsuits, not much of that stuff. But I probably will bring her on at some point soon to get an idea of the background of her life. All the stuff she did before getting involved with Priscilla, and Priscilla's wrecked her life. Let me tell you, Priscilla has wrecked her life. It's not Priscilla that's the victim of elder abuse. It's Bridget Cruz, the victim of Scientology. And lawyers fees, all that stuff. Anyhow, that's from Bridget's side. You know what I'm saying? I have to say that so they don't come after me. All right, let's continue. One of the most ridiculous rumors I've ever heard concerning Elvis and the Colonel was that the Colonel persuaded the U.S. Army to draft Elvis because he was wild and unmanageable. That night in Germany, Elvis told us that he was at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Hollywood with the Colonel when the draft notice was delivered to Graceland. Vernon called the Colonel and asked him to break the news to Elvis. Elvis asked the Colonel to announce it during dinner with his Hollywood cronies, Nick Adams, Vince Edwards, Jack Simmons, and other young actors. Certainly there were times in the early days when the Colonel had to hunt down Elvis when he was supposed to be on stage. Usually he found him dreaming in a movie theater. But there was never any reason to lock Elvis away in the Army for 2 years, away from the stage and studio where he could make money. Years later, when I asked the Colonel about the rumor, he laughed. Why would a manager with thousands invested in the artist want to have the artist drafted, the Colonel said. How could he be so crazy? No one could predict how 2 years in the Army would affect Elvis's career. The public could have easily forgotten him. Huh. I almost felt like Tom Hanks for a second. Thanks to the Colonel's tireless and inventive promotion throughout the Elvis's Army stint, by the time he was discharged, he was more popular than ever. Even though he had recorded only once during the entire tour of duty. That session was arranged during one of Elvis's weekend passes from June 10th to June 12th in 1958 in Nashville, Tennessee. DJ Fontana, Elvis's drummer, was the only musician at the session from the original group of musicians that disbanded when Elvis was drafted. Now, the new musicians were recruited from the top sidemen at the time. You had Chet Atkins, Hank Sugarfoot Garland on guitar, Floyd Kramer on piano, Bobby Moore on bass, and Buddy Harmon on bongos and drums. The Jordanaires sang backup, and in one night they recorded 5 songs that would become smash hits. I need your love tonight. Ooh, ooh. That's a great song. Hey, baby, I ain't asking much of you. No, 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 baby. That's a great song. Big Hunk of Love. I could drive around the world in a no-box car. What was that? Hey, that loving you, baby. Hey, that loving you so. That's a great song. Didn't do the melody quite right there. Pardon me if I'm sentimental. Man, I can't sing all of a sudden. Fool Such As I and I Got Stung. Great songs. Energetic songs. Elvis Presley was like a hopping around on a hot plate singing those songs. I guarantee you. Especially I Got Stung, A Big Hunk of Love, and I Need Your Love Tonight. Especially those songs. What great songs. If Elvis could have only had songs like that in the 60s. I mean, he had some very cool songs, you know, and don't get me wrong. Surrender. I mean, of course, we're talking mid-60s. He didn't have many songs, but, you know, You Give Your Hand to Me, and Then You Say Hello. That's a great song. You Don't Know Me. But still, he just didn't have the songs, the caliber songs like that. And we know why, because Colonel Parker didn't want to pay these songwriters. He wanted to take half the publishing. And a lot of these writers, music was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they were making money with these other acts. All right. They were released during Elvis's 2 years in the Army, along with other tunes like Hard-Headed Woman, One Night, and King Creole that he'd recorded in 58 before he was drafted. Now, my favorite of the showbiz tales Elvis recounted that night didn't concern the Colonel. It was about Elvis's affair with the movie star Natalie Wood. The breathtaking brunette with large, melting brown eyes and a petite, exquisitely proportioned figure. I want to bathe with Natalie Wood, was how he put it, is what Joe says. One morning, he had to play a sad scene in the movie that he was making at the time, but he had trouble projecting that emotion. You know, guys, he confided to the film crew, I'm having trouble acting sad because last night I was in bed with Natalie Wood. So how can you be unhappy after that? Red broke in suddenly. He just returned from a brief foray out of the gates where he checked out that night's crop of fans. There's a USO hostess out there who's heading out to Berlin tomorrow, and she'd really like to see you, maybe get an autograph. He winked broadly and turned to escort the girl into the room. Now we drew a collective breath. She was stunning, darkly beautiful, a taller version of Natalie Wood, no less. Elvis leapt up karate style from his armchair and met her halfway across the room. He flashed that smile, shook her hand, and drawled another charmingly bashful introduction. Hello, I'm Elvis Presley. Glad to meet you. I'd never thought that people could blush all the way down to their ankles, but this girl did. If the scene had been set from a movie, the soundtrack would have swelled with girl meets boy violins. Clearly overcome, she sat down quickly next to me. We smiled at each other and introduced ourselves. Her name was Sue Anderson. I like this life, I thought to myself. Elvis picked up the thread of his Hollywood stories with even greater energy. Yeah, there's some weird people out there, he said. But there's some great ones too, like Robert Mitchum. He's one of the good guys. Elvis abandoned his chair to stand in the center of the room. Mitchum came over to me one day on a set after he heard I'd been drafted. I got some advice for you, Elvis, he told me. Don't go, just don't go. If I were in your shoes at the top of your career and getting hotter, there's no way they could have got me in the Army. I'd hide as long as I could, and when they caught me, I'd grab a hold of the wooden rail on my front porch so hard that it would take medics weeks to pull all the splinters from under my nails. Well, it sounds like Robert Mitchum's glad he didn't have to go in the Army. Elvis accompanied the story with a comical imitation of Mitchum showing him how he hung on for dear life. Another piece of advice Mitchum gave me was to make up stories for the reporters. Elvis continued. I'll never tell the truth and never tell the same lie twice. Just make up any old story. Those reporters will make up most of the stuff anyways, and you might as well have some fun with them. Elvis laughed as he recounted some of the fabrications Mitchum had passed on to reporters over the years. Now, this is what Mitchum told Elvis that he did. I'd tell him one time that he was an orphan, and not going to give up until he found the truth about his parents. Another time his dad spent most of his time and life in prison, and still another, he said he'd been in prison himself, as had his wife. Anything that came into his head during the interview was fine. Mitchum's right, Elvis concluded. I hate to give interviews because they talk with you about an hour, and they pick one little thing, and then make it the headline. This one female reporter really ticked me off. We must have talked for about an hour about my music. About where I think we're heading with rock and roll, how I feel about the movies, and on and on. The last question she asked me was what books I've been reading lately. I told her I don't get much time to read because of my heavy schedule. Well, when the story came out, the headline read, Elvis doesn't like to read books. Isn't that a kick in the ass? He concluded, slapping the heel of his boot for emphasis. Hey, Charlie, let's do some gospel music, baby. Charlie Hodge was a soft-hearted, good old boy from Decatur, Alabama. Decatur, Alabama is about 45-50 miles from where I live, by the way. Charlie was about 5'2", but well built for his size. Charlie had been in show business all his life, singing in gospel and country music. Now, he was based in another town, not too far from us, and visited on weekends. As Elvis walked back to the piano, he directed a smile at Sue. That's that lookalike. Sue Anderson, the Natalie Wood lookalike. First off, have y'all seen pictures of Sue Anderson? Have you heard any stories about her besides me reading in this book? Just curious. I'll have to look her up after this. As Elvis walked back to the piano, he directed a smile at Sue. The Robert Mitchum story was designed to warm Sue up. The gospel music would melt her down. Charlie and Elvis sang a few selections, closing with How Great Thou Art. That was a great song. Elvis, God, I need to stop singing today. I think I lost my voice singing so much this weekend. Oh, Lord, my God, when I in awesome wonder. And he'd probably play the piano. Awesome wonder, even in 1958. Consider all thy worlds thy hands have made. Nobody's saying how great the art is good as Elvis. Nobody. Nobody. Not even close. Elvis packed the lyrics of passion. Ended by banging out a few chords, then stood up to stretch and yawn. Hey, it's good timing for me, right? He blew his nose once more, then announced that he'd better hit the sack. Tomorrow was going to be an early day because his unit was doing a special field exercise. Red said you wanted an autograph, he said to Sue. She blushed an even deeper scarlet. Come back with me. I'll find a photograph for you. Well, she rose from her seat and wobbled on high heels around the hallway, towards the bedroom and out of sight. Well, let's get some pizza, Lamar suggested to the group. Anyone up for that? But I'm in Tap City. Now, Tap City was GI code for being broke. Most soldiers were in Tap City from about mid-month until the next payday. It was only 5 days until payday, so few of us had any money, but thanks to some gambling winnings, I had ready cash and volunteered to pay. Lamar made sure that Elvis was busy with Sue and wouldn't be rejoining the group, so we headed out to Beck's Bar, a few blocks away. Why they gotta talk about pizza? Y'all know I'm on a diet, right? Most of y'all know this, and some of you said you're kind of doing a similar diet or you're on a diet as well, but today is day 7 for me. I started last Monday doing mainly fish, some fruit, and the reason why fish, like tuna and whitefish, because they're high in protein, very, very low in calories. Yeah, you can have a big old piece of whitefish like that. It's about 80 to 120, 130 calories. Lemon pepper. Yeah, I had a can of tuna, 90 calories. Think about that. I'm a guy. I need about 2,500 to 3,000 calories. We all have different calorie intake needs, but if you have a calorie deficit, it's going to help you. Protein, if you eat protein, it helps you not be as hungry as long as you don't have carbs. So let's just say I eat 5 cans of tuna a day. And I'm not doing 5 cans. I'm doing a couple cans. I'm doing some whitefish and doing a little fruit. But 5 cans, 450 calories. What's going to happen if you're drinking a lot of water and if you're eating those 5 cans of tuna, 450 calories during the 12, 13, 14, 15 hours that you're awake, and you sleep the other 8, 9, 10 hours, right? That's your fasting time. Wake up in the morning, some black coffee, eat your whatever you're going to eat about 3 hours after that. So essentially, you get 11 or 12 hours where you're not putting many calories in your body. Now, I'm not saying this is for everybody. You know, everybody, like my wife, she's doing it and she's doing good. I think she's lost 4 pounds this week. You know, she only has a target of another 6 pounds. Me, I got a pretty big target. I started at 196. And this morning, I'm 186.8. So in less, I guess that's 7 full days, right? Yeah, 7 days, I've lost 10 pounds. So yeah, I mean, it's not as torturous as you think after day 3 or day 4. But when I read stuff about pizza, okay, let's finish. Okay, we're gonna finish so I can read another book for y'all a little later on this afternoon. Elvis was gonna call in sick tomorrow, Lamar predicted confidently as we filed out the side door into the cold night. He's gonna say that he doesn't feel well and has to spend the day in bed. I don't blame him. Did y'all guys get a load of that USO girl? Man, if the guys back home knew that we had that kind of stuff in uniform, they could knock off the draft. Guys would volunteer by the trainload, said Lamar. Well, a few hours later, I tiptoed quietly into my own barracks room where I was sure George was sleeping soundly. I hadn't even switched on the lights when I heard, "Well, how did it go?" "I thought you were sleeping," said Joe Esposito. Sleep? Hell, what is Elvis really like?" "Well, I couldn't get over how down to earth he is," I said. "He really made me feel at home, and he told us all about Hollywood. Now, he invited me to play some touch football next weekend, so why don't you come?" "Man, Joe, that would be great," George enthused. "See, I was too excited myself," Joe Esposito said, "to fall asleep right away. I laid in my bunk, going over the events of the evening, and I must have dreamed the whole thing," I concluded. How could I have been back there in Elvis Presley's living room talking about movie stars and still come away with the feeling of having hung out with an unassuming, regular guy? That concludes the end of chapter 1. So I like how Joe wrapped it up. That Elvis was a regular, unassuming guy. You know, he certainly paints a story of Colonel Parker being a, excuse me. I don't know if he was painting him for being a good guy. He certainly painted some stories that I hadn't heard. That, at least I don't remember hearing. That taking the $5,000 out of his own money and giving it, because I guess he had enough confidence in his own wheelings and dealings. He probably presented some other information. He probably did something. Or maybe they just knew Colonel Parker would get a deal done somewhere, and they didn't want to miss out because they'd heard about how hot Elvis was in the South. And so, yeah, so as we digest this first chapter, first I want to hear, has your opinion on Joe changed at all? To the better, to the worse? Has your opinion on Colonel Parker changed at all? For the better, for the worse? I skipped a couple things in there that was a little, I don't want to say lewd, but a little bit. I don't know. I mean, Elvis probably, once again, Elvis is a guy, we've all said things. Guys have said things, girls have said things for the most part. 95, 99% of us have said stuff that's rude and crude or lewd or, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we like to think about our heroes as being perfect. The people that we admire about not having any crutches or vices and stuff, okay? But I think we all here on this channel all understand Elvis was a human, right? He even said himself he lost his temper sometimes. And he didn't like it when he lost his temper because he just went too far. One of the reasons why he didn't drink. It made him lose his temper. He was not a happy drunk. Like Ben, his grandson, was supposedly a happy-go-lucky drinker. But, the thing is, I'm going to continue reading this book, I believe. I think it's a great piece of history. We're learning some things, perhaps, that, like, did y'all know that he got the draft notice when he was with Parker and not at home? I don't, unfortunately, I still have negatives, and I'm remiss that I've not gotten this done for Jenny Jorgensen. But Jenny Jorgensen sent me some negatives from the Gary Pepper collection that has Elvis holding up his draft notice. It's the negative. And I need to get pictures done. I haven't found somebody that I feel like I trust yet, and I need to because, I want to send her those negatives back. And the pictures, and then have pictures for myself, right? To share with y'all. But we've seen him. We've seen Elvis holding up the draft notice at Christmas. But he was with Colonel Parker when the draft notice came. Now, was Parker aware? What do we think about that? Do we think that Colonel Parker did set it up and lied to Joe so he could get Elvis in the Army and maybe convert him from the wild rock and roll singer that Elvis was, the Memphis Flash, to more respectable, worldwide, nationwide product that he could sell to the parents, product he could sell to the normal folk that weren't the wild teenagers. Did Parker recognize that as Elvis got older, his crowd better get older, or he would suffer? I'm just thinking from that business sense. Elvis still had fans that were young, fans that were old, even when he was in his 40s. But rock and roll did phase out, and then the Beatles came along. Was Parker psychic about that? Did he know the music was going to change, and Elvis wasn't going to sing no Britain stuff? wasn't Elvis's fault. You know, the Beatles were influenced by him. So those are some things to ponder on, to think about. Maybe you've thought about it, maybe you haven't. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. This is Ray Elvis Photos. Thank you for taking a trip down memory lane with Joe Esposito and Good Rock in the Night and Ray Elvis Photos, all right? TCB TLC, till next time.